The late evening sky had turned a deep purple as the young defense attorney gathered his papers from his desk. He'd just won a challenging case, successfully defending a client who'd been wrongly charged with theft. The victory felt especially sweet since it was his third win this month. His colleagues had already left for the day, leaving the office quiet except for the soft hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum in the distance. He smiled, thinking about how he'd tell his wife about the case. She always loved hearing the details of his work, especially when justice prevailed. The leather briefcase made a satisfying click as he closed it, stuffed full with case files and his trusty laptop. The drive home started like any other. The streets were peaceful, with only a few cars sharing the road. The radio played softly in the background, an old soul tune that reminded him of Sunday dinners at his parents' house. He'd been careful to follow all traffic rules, just as he always did. Growing up, his father had taught him to be extra cautious, a lesson he'd never forgotten. His thoughts drifted to the weekend ahead. His mother was planning one of her famous family dinners, and he was looking forward to bringing the good news about his recent court victory. The neighborhood streets were familiar, lined with maple trees that had just started showing hints of autumn colors. He'd driven this route hundreds of times before, always keeping to the speed limit, always following the rules to the letter. The first flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror seemed almost surreal. He checked his speedometer again, exactly at the limit. His turn signals had been working fine, and he knew his tail lights were all functioning. He just had the car serviced last week. Still, he did exactly what he'd advised countless clients to do. He put on his hazard lights, slowly pulled over to a safe spot, and kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. The cool night air carried the sound of approaching footsteps. Through his side mirror, he could see two officers approaching, one on each side of his car. His heart rate picked up slightly, not from guilt, but from the weight of experience, both personal and professional. He knew what could happen during traffic stops, even to someone who knew the law inside and out. As a defense attorney, he handled dozens of cases that started just like this, routine traffic stops that somehow went wrong. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and professional. The registration and insurance papers were right where they should be in the glove compartment, but he knew better than to reach for them before being asked. The tap on his window was sharp and loud in the quiet night. As he prepared to lower it, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be the simple traffic stop it should have been. His legal training told him to document everything in his mind, to note every detail, every word that would be exchanged. But for now, he focused on remaining composed and cooperative. Little did he know that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not just his legal expertise, but his faith in the very system he dedicated his life to upholding. The next few minutes would shatter the quiet routine of his evening and set in motion events that would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others in his community. The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. In the years to come, he would remember this exact moment, the moment before everything changed, when he was still just a successful lawyer heading home after a good day's work, before he became the center of a story that would expose deep-rooted problems in the justice system he thought he knew so well. License and registration. Came the gruff voice from his driver's side window. The attorney reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "Sir, I'm a defense attorney," he said clearly, passing his documents through the window. "May I ask why I was stopped?" The response came quickly, too quickly, as if rehearsed. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." The flashlight beam swept across the car's interior, lingering unnecessarily long on the leather briefcase in the passenger seat. The second officer circled to the other side, shining his light directly into the back seat. "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer ordered, his tone shifting sharply. The attorney knew his rights. He'd explained them to countless clients. "Officer, I respectfully decline unless you have probable cause. I've broken no laws." His heart was pounding now, but his voice remained steady, professional. "I smell something suspicious," the officer declared, though there was nothing to smell except the new car freshener hanging from the mirror. The attorney's stomach tightened. He'd heard this exact line in too many cases he'd defended. It was a common tactic, one that made his pulse quicken despite knowing he was completely innocent. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The door was yanked open, rough hands grabbed his arm, and he was pulled from his car despite his calm protests. The cold pavement pressed against his cheek as he was held down, his expensive suit collecting dirt from the roadside. "I'm a lawyer," he repeated. "This is unlawful detention." His years of legal training fought with his rising fear as they began searching his car. He could hear drawers being opened, papers shuffling, his briefcase being unzipped. Through it all, he kept his voice level, reciting badge numbers and noting the time, building his mental record of every violation of protocol. Then came the words that made his blood run cold. "Look what we found." The attorney twisted his head to see one officer emerging from his car, holding a small package he'd never seen before. His mind raced. He knew his car, knew every item in it, knew with absolute certainty that whatever they were claiming to have found hadn't been there before. "That's not mine," he stated firmly, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "I demand body camera footage be preserved, and I'm invoking my right to counsel." The officers exchanged glances that made his stomach turn. He'd seen that look before, from the other side of the courtroom. The handcuffs were tight enough to hurt, metal biting into his wrists as they pulled him up. The neighborhood he'd driven through countless times now felt alien, hostile. Porch lights flicked on in nearby houses, curious faces peering through windows at the scene unfolding on their quiet street. His new car, a symbol of his hard-earned success, was being torn apart piece by piece. The officers pulled out his case files, letting papers scatter in the evening breeze. His phone, lying on the passenger seat, lit up with his wife's familiar photo. She would be wondering why he wasn't home yet. The next few minutes blurred together. The rough push into the back of the patrol car, the crackle of radio calls, the growing knot of dread in his stomach as he watched his professional reputation crumbling before his eyes. Every detail, every word, every action was searing itself into his memory. As a defense attorney, he knew this moment would be crucial later, when he fought back against this injustice. As the patrol car pulled away, he caught a final glimpse of his car, door still open, papers strewn across the street like fallen leaves. The clock on the patrol car's dashboard read 10:03 p.m. Just 16 minutes had passed since he was first pulled over, 16 minutes that would change everything. In the window's reflection, he could see his own face, set in grim determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who'd ever faced this kind of injustice without having the legal knowledge to fight back. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. The defense attorney sat straight-backed on the cold metal bench, still in his court suit from earlier that day, though it was now wrinkled and stained from the roadside encounter. His wrists were finally free from the handcuffs, but he could still feel where they had dug into his skin. "Stand up," ordered the booking officer, pointing to a marked spot on the floor. The camera clicked, capturing his face from the front, then the side. He'd seen thousands of these mugshots in case files, but never imagined he'd be the subject of one. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just hours ago, he'd been the one defending others, and now he was the one needing defense. The fingerprinting process felt surreal. Black ink stained his fingertips as they rolled each finger across the paper, documenting prints he knew would now be in the system forever. He thought about how many times he'd examined fingerprint records for his own cases, how many times he questioned their validity. Now he was on the other side of that process. His one phone call went to the managing partner of his law firm, a decision made with his legal mind, even as his heart ached to call his wife. "They planted something in my car," he explained quickly, keeping his voice low but clear. "It's a setup." The senior partner's response was immediate and reassuring. Stay quiet. We're coming. The holding cell was small and smelled of disinfectant and despair. He sat on the bench, back against the wall, watching others being brought in. Young people, old people, all caught in the same system he'd fought against for years. Some recognized him from court appearances, their eyes widening in surprise. He nodded slightly, maintaining his dignity even here. Time moved strangely in the cell. The clock on the wall seemed to tick in slow motion. He used the time to mentally document everything that had happened, every detail that would be important later. The badge numbers of the arresting officers, the exact words they'd used, the timeline of events. His lawyer's training wouldn't let him miss anything. News traveled fast in the legal community. Through the cell bars, he could hear officers whispering, some gleeful, others uncomfortable about having a defense attorney in custody. His phone, taken during booking, probably had dozens of missed calls by now. He thought about the headlines that would appear in tomorrow's papers. How quickly a reputation built over years could be questioned. The sound of familiar voices made him look up. The managing partner had arrived with another defense attorney from their firm. Their faces were grim but determined as they spoke with the booking officers. He could hear fragments of their conversation, discussions of bail, of the suspicious circumstances, of his spotless record. The processing out took almost as long as the processing in. Papers were signed, belongings were returned in sealed plastic bags, and conditions of release were explained. His colleagues stood beside him through it all, their presence a shield against the hostile stares from some of the officers. Finally, at nearly 3 a.m, he walked out of the station. The night air had turned cold, or maybe it was just the chill of everything that had happened. His firm's partner squeezed his shoulder, saying, "We're going to fight this." Hard. They all knew what this kind of charge could do to a lawyer's career, even if proven false. In the car ride home, they began planning the defense. They would need the body camera footage, the dash cam videos, maintenance records for his car to prove no contraband was possible. But more than that, they would need to expose the larger pattern. This wasn't just about one wrong arrest. It was about a system that allowed such injustices to happen far too often. As they pulled up to his house, he saw the lights were still on. His wife was waiting at the door, worry etched on her face. This would be the hardest part, explaining to his family how the system he devoted his life to had turned against him. But as he walked toward the house, his determination grew stronger. This night of injustice wouldn't break him. It would fuel his fight for change. Morning light streamed through the law firm's conference room windows as the defense attorney spread papers across the large table. His own case file lay open before him. A strange feeling, seeing his name at the top of these documents. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his mind was sharp, focused on the task ahead. The dashcam footage is crucial, he explained to his colleagues who had gathered to help. As a defense attorney, he'd seen how often this evidence mysteriously disappeared. We need to file the preservation request immediately. His fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, drafting the legal documents with the same precision he'd used for countless other cases. 2 other attorneys from the firm were already making calls, requesting body camera footage from both officers involved. Another was digging through police records, looking for patterns in traffic stops along that same stretch of road. The room hummed with purposeful energy. These lawyers knew they weren't just fighting one case, they were possibly uncovering something much bigger. The preliminary police report arrived, and reading it made his blood boil. The official account barely resembled what had happened. According to the report, he had been combative and suspicious. He carefully noted each discrepancy, each embellishment, each outright lie. These would be important later. His eyes caught a detail in the report, the location of the traffic stop. He pulled up his phone's location history, thanking technology for keeping such precise records. The timestamps would prove crucial, showing exactly how long he'd been held before being taken to the station. Every minute mattered in cases like this. The data started painting a picture. Over the past year, that particular stretch of road had seen a suspiciously high number of traffic stops. His paralegal had compiled the statistics. Of those stopped, an overwhelming majority shared his demographic profile. The numbers couldn't be ignored. They told a story of systematic targeting. A knock on the conference room door brought welcome news. A young officer from the precinct wanted to talk, anonymously. The officer had been troubled by similar incidents and was willing to share internal documents showing unofficial quotas and targeting practices. It was a breakthrough, but they'd need to handle it carefully to protect their source. Lunch came and went, forgotten sandwiches growing stale as they worked. The defense attorney's phone kept buzzing. Reporters wanting comments, colleagues offering support, clients asking about their cases. He let the calls go to voicemail, staying focused on building his defense. His wife handled the press calls, firmly stating no comment while taking detailed messages. By mid-afternoon, they had filed multiple records requests: traffic stop data for the past 5 years, officer complaint histories, precinct policies, and training materials. Each request was carefully worded to cast a wide net while staying within legal boundaries. They couldn't risk giving the department any reason to deny these requests. A civil rights organization reached out, offering support and resources. They had been tracking similar incidents and saw this case as a potential watershed moment. Their data added another layer to the building evidence, a pattern of stops that couldn't be explained by chance or legitimate police work. The defense attorney stood at the window, watching the city bustle below. In his mind, he could still feel the cold pavement against his face from the night before. But now, that memory fueled his determination. The evidence was mounting, piece by piece, building toward something bigger than his own case. As evening approached, the conference room walls were covered with timeline charts, statistical graphs, and case law citations. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about exposing a broken system. His own experience as a defense attorney, combined with this new perspective as a victim of injustice, gave him unique insight into how to fight back. He gathered his team for a final strategy session. Tomorrow, they would begin filing the formal motions, but tonight, they had laid the groundwork for a defense that would do more than clear his name. It would challenge the entire system that allowed such injustices to persist. The morning newspaper sat untouched on the kitchen table, its headline making his stomach turn. Respected defense attorney arrested on drug charges. His wife touched his shoulder gently, sliding a cup of coffee in front of him. Neither of them had slept well since that night, but they kept going, supporting each other through this nightmare. His phone buzzed again. Another client canceling their representation. That made 5 this week. He understood their concerns. Who would want a lawyer facing their own criminal charges? The firm had been supportive, but he could feel the subtle shift in how some colleagues looked at him now, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. The school where his wife taught had called her in for a meeting. Though they spoke in careful terms about public image and parent concerns, the message was clear. They were worried about having a teacher whose spouse was facing criminal charges. She had held her head high, reminding them about presumption of innocence, but he could see how the stress wore on her. Their normally peaceful neighborhood felt different now. Neighbors who used to wave now hurried inside when they saw him. The local coffee shop, where he'd been a regular for years, suddenly felt uncomfortable, the barista's smile a bit too forced. It was as if the arrest had painted him with an invisible mark that everyone could see. His teenage daughter came home from school with red eyes one day. Some kids had made comments about her dad being a criminal lawyer who turned criminal. The words hit him harder than any legal setback. He had always taught her about justice and doing what's right, and now she was facing bullying because of false accusations against him. The financial strain was beginning to show too. Legal fees for his own defense, even with colleagues helping, were mounting. Some clients who stayed loyal had asked for reduced rates, questioning his full attention to their cases. The savings they'd put aside for their daughter's college fund remained untouched, but the future felt uncertain. His wife found him late one night in his home office, surrounded by case files, some his own, some from past clients who had faced similar situations. "You're not alone in this," she reminded him, her voice firm and loving. "And you're not just fighting for yourself anymore." She was right. Every letter of support, every message from people sharing similar stories, showed him how his case had become something bigger. The local bar association had called an emergency meeting about his situation. Colleagues he'd known for years now had to decide whether to stand by him or distance themselves. Some chose courage, speaking out about the broader implications of his case. Others remained silent, protecting their own interests. He understood both reactions, having seen how the system could punish those who challenged it. His mother called daily, her voice a mixture of worry and fierce pride. "Stand tall," she would say, reminding him of the family's history of facing adversity with dignity. His father, though retired, had started attending court proceedings again, sitting silently in support during every hearing. At dinner that evening, his daughter surprised them by presenting a social media campaign she created about wrongful arrests and police accountability. Despite their initial concerns about her getting involved, her determination to fight injustice filled him with pride. She was learning the same lesson he was teaching his clients, that sometimes you had to stand up, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. The mail brought another cancellation letter from a long-term client, but mixed in was a handwritten note from a young man he defended years ago. "You believed in me when no one else did," it read. "Now it's our turn to believe in you." The letter reminded him why he'd become a defense attorney in the first place, to fight for justice, especially when it seemed most distant. As night fell, he sat on their back porch, listening to the neighborhood sounds. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more meetings, more motions to file, more battles to fight. But tonight, surrounded by the love of his family and strengthened by the support of those who understood his fight, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filled every seat. The defense attorney stood at the front, looking out at faces that reflected his own experience. Each person had a story: a traffic stop gone wrong, a planted piece of evidence, a life disrupted by injustice. What had started as his personal fight was growing into something much larger. "Your case opened my eyes," said a local business owner, standing up to share his story. "Last year, the same thing happened to my brother, but we were too scared to fight back." Others nodded in agreement. The fear of speaking out was familiar to everyone in the room, but something was changing. People were finding their voices. A civil rights lawyer from a neighboring city had brought files documenting similar cases across the state. The pattern was impossible to ignore: the same intersection, the same officers, the same claims of suspicious behavior, followed by miraculous discoveries of evidence. The defense attorney's case wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a troubling pattern. During a break, an elderly gentleman approached him with tears in his eyes. "My grandson went to prison because of a traffic stop like yours," he said quietly. Nobody believed him when he said the drugs weren't his. Nobody wanted to listen. The defense attorney listened, adding another story to the growing collection of injustices that needed to be addressed. Local news cameras captured the meeting, broadcasting it live. Social media buzzed with clips and quotes. The hashtag they created was trending, bringing attention to similar cases nationwide. What had happened on that quiet suburban street was sparking conversations in living rooms and boardrooms across the country. A police reform advocate took the stage, sharing statistics that backed up everyone's personal experiences. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of traffic stops, patterns of targeting, inconsistencies in reporting. The defense attorney watched as people took notes, recorded videos, and shared information. Knowledge was becoming their strongest weapon. His wife sat in the back of the room, coordinating with other family members who had been through similar ordeals. They were creating support networks, sharing resources, helping each other navigate the complicated legal system. The ripples of his case were creating waves of change. A young law student raised her hand during the question period. I chose law school because I wanted to make a difference, she said. But seeing what happened to you, a respected attorney, it's scary. How do we fight back without becoming targets ourselves? Her question hung in the air, heavy with implications. The defense attorney stepped forward, his voice clear and determined. We fight back by standing together, he answered. By documenting everything. By using the law as it was meant to be used, to protect everyone's rights, not just some people's rights. The room erupted in applause, hope mixing with determination. As the meeting continued, people formed working groups. Some focused on gathering data, others on community outreach. Legal professionals offered their services pro bono. Community leaders pledged their support. What had started as one man's fight for justice was becoming a movement for systemic change. Outside the community center, reporters gathered interviews. People shared their stories, many for the first time. The fear of speaking out was still there, but it was being overcome by something stronger. The realization that change was possible if enough people stood together. The evening ended with a plan for regular meetings, action committees, and a legal defense fund for similar cases. As people left, there was a new energy in their steps. The defense attorney's wife squeezed his hand, both of them understanding that their personal struggle had become part of something much bigger than themselves. Walking to their car under the streetlights, they passed others heading home, exchanging nods of recognition and support. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more battles to fight. But tonight, they had witnessed the birth of something powerful. A community united against injustice, inspired to fight for change. The law firm's largest conference room had become a war room. Digital screens displayed timelines, maps, and data analysis. Photos of similar traffic stops lined one wall, each representing someone who'd faced the same injustice. The defense attorney studied them carefully, seeing his own story reflected in dozens of others. The dash cam footage tells a different story than their report, one of his colleagues pointed out, replaying the video for the 10th time. Every detail mattered. The officer's approach, their practiced movements, the way they seemed to know exactly where to find the planted evidence. The footage wasn't just inconsistent with their report, it completely contradicted it. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former officer, now retired, reached out through secure channels. I couldn't sleep after seeing your story, his message read. I saw this happen too many times. I have records documentation. His hands shook as he read the message. This could be the evidence they needed. 3 other professionals had come forward with similar stories. A doctor, a teacher, and a small business owner. Each had faced identical tactics. A routine stop, claims of suspicious behavior, mysteriously discovered evidence. But unlike many others, these 3 had the resources and courage to fight back. Their testimonies would show a clear pattern. The evidence of tampered police reports was damning. Timestamps didn't match. Details changed between drafts. The defense team had discovered identical phrases copied and pasted across multiple reports, suggesting a template for fabricating evidence. It was sloppy work, the kind that only happened when people thought nobody would look too closely. His wife brought lunch to the team, but nobody stopped working to eat. The sandwiches grew cold as they pored over internal department memos, analyzing language patterns and unofficial policies. Someone had created a spreadsheet tracking every traffic stop at that intersection over the past 5 years. The numbers told a story that couldn't be ignored. The whistleblower's testimony was recorded in a secure location. The former officer's voice trembled as he described the unofficial quota system, the pressure to make arrests, the targeting of specific neighborhoods and individuals. I retired early because of this, he admitted. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Late afternoon brought another piece of the puzzle. Body camera footage from other arrests showed the same officers using identical tactics. The pattern was clear. The same approach, the same phrases, the same mysterious discoveries. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a practiced routine. The defense attorney's own experience helped shape their strategy. He knew how the system worked from both sides now. He understood the pressure officers faced to make arrests, but he also knew firsthand the devastating impact of their actions. This perspective would be crucial in court. A junior attorney burst into the room with news. They'd found inconsistencies in the evidence logging system. The timing of when items were checked in didn't match the arrest records. It was a small detail, but in legal cases, small details could crack open the biggest lies. The decision not to accept a plea deal had been the hardest choice. The prosecutor had offered a sweet deal, no jail time, just probation and a fine. But accepting it would mean admitting guilt, and more importantly, it would mean letting the broken system continue unchanged. The defense attorney knew he had to fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd faced similar injustice. As night fell, the team gathered for a final strategy session. They had built a strong case. Evidence of misconduct, proof of systematic targeting, testimony from credible witnesses. But more than that, they had built a case that could change how these incidents were handled in the future. The defense attorney looked around the room at his tired but determined colleagues. Tomorrow, they would begin presenting their case in court. The evidence was solid, the witnesses were ready, and the truth was on their side. It was time to show that justice could work both ways, not just for those enforcing the law, but for those wrongly accused by it. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters as the defense attorney climbed them, his wife's hand steady in his. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Community members, fellow lawyers, and journalists filled every available seat. The air felt heavy with anticipation as the judge took the bench. Opening statements set the stage. The prosecution painted their usual picture. A routine traffic stop, suspicious behavior, discovered evidence. But when the defense attorney stood to speak, the energy in the room shifted. This isn't just about one traffic stop, he began. This is about a pattern of injustice that has gone on far too long. The dashcam footage played on the courtroom screens. Frame by frame, it showed the truth. No suspicious behavior, no probable cause, just a targeted stop with a predetermined outcome. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably as the defense team highlighted each discrepancy between the video and the official report. Next came the whistleblower, the retired officer whose conscience had finally won out. His testimony was devastating. He described the unofficial quotas, the targeting practices, the unwritten rules about which cars to stop and which people to search. The jury leaned forward, hanging on every word as he revealed the inner workings of a broken system. The data analyst took the stand next, presenting charts and graphs that showed the pattern of stops at that intersection. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Hundreds of similar stops, all following the same script, all targeting specific groups. The prosecutor's attempts to explain away the statistics fell flat. A powerful moment came when the 3 other victims testified. The doctor described losing patience after his arrest. The teacher talked about being placed on leave. The business owner spoke about nearly losing everything. Their stories echoed the defense attorney's own experience, showing how a single traffic stop could derail innocent lives. The prosecution's case began to crumble under cross-examination. The arresting officers struggled to explain the inconsistencies in their reports. Their practiced answers started to sound rehearsed, hollow. When confronted with evidence of the copied and pasted report language, one officer's face went pale. During a brief recess, the defense attorney hugged his daughter, who had insisted on being there. "You're showing everyone what fighting back looks like," she whispered. Her words reminded him why this fight mattered. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about changing the future. The evidence log discrepancies proved crucial. The defense team demonstrated how the timing of evidence processing didn't match the arrest records. The jury's expressions showed they understood the implications. Evidence hadn't just been discovered, it had been planted. The courtroom fell silent as surveillance footage from the police station played, showing officers discussing their tactics before the reports were filed. It was casual conversation, but damning. They talked about the usual procedure and making the story fit. The prosecutor's objections couldn't erase what everyone had heard. Community leaders testified about similar patterns in their neighborhoods. Their stories painted a picture of systematic targeting that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. The jury took notes constantly, their faces showing growing understanding of the bigger picture. The defense's closing argument was powerful in its simplicity. This case isn't just about one night, one stop, or one person, the attorney said. It's about a system that has forgotten its purpose, to protect and serve everyone equally. As he spoke, heads nodded throughout the courtroom. As the jury filed out for deliberations, the defense attorney felt a strange sense of peace. Win or lose, the truth had been exposed. The cameras outside would carry the story across the country. The evidence had been made public. The system's flaws had been revealed in a way that couldn't be ignored. His wife squeezed his hand as they waited. Around them, supporters gathered in quiet solidarity. The fight wasn't over, but something had already changed. The truth had been spoken in a court of law, backed by evidence that couldn't be denied. Now they waited to see if justice would finally be served. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach their verdict. As people filed back into the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to touch. The defense attorney stood straight, his wife's hand clasped tightly in his, as the jury foreman rose to speak. "Not guilty," rang out clearly through the hushed room, followed by a wave of relieved sighs and quiet tears. But this victory was just the beginning. Within days of the verdict, the police department faced mounting pressure for reform. The evidence presented at trial had exposed problems that couldn't be ignored. The chief of police called for an internal investigation, and the mayor announced the formation of an independent review board. The defense attorney's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted interviews, civil rights organizations sought his expertise, and other lawyers asked for advice on similar cases. But the calls that meant the most came from ordinary people, sharing their stories and asking for help. Each call strengthened his resolve to create lasting change. At his law firm, changes were already happening. They established a new division focused specifically on cases involving police misconduct during traffic stops. Young lawyers, inspired by the case, volunteered to work on similar cases pro bono. The conference room where they had built his defense became a permanent war room for fighting systemic injustice. The police department implemented new policies. Body cameras had to stay on during entire shifts. Traffic stop protocols were rewritten. Most importantly, an external oversight committee was established to review complaints. Officers would now face real consequences for misconduct. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Community meetings continued, but the tone had changed. Instead of fear and frustration, people shared stories of standing up to injustice. The defense fund they had established helped other victims fight back. The network of support grew stronger, crossing neighborhood and social boundaries. People who had once felt powerless found their voice. His daughter's social media campaign had grown into a full-fledged advocacy organization. Young people across the city got involved, monitoring police activity, documenting incidents, and supporting victims of misconduct. They used technology and social media to shine a light on injustice and demand accountability. The whistleblower's courage inspired others to come forward. More officers began speaking out about problems they had witnessed. The blue wall of silence showed cracks as good officers realized that protecting bad behavior only hurt their profession. Change was happening from within the department itself. Training programs were reformed. The defense attorney himself was invited to speak to new police recruits, sharing his experience from both sides of the law. He didn't speak with anger, but with hope for a better system. Some officers initially resisted, but others listened and learned. Bridges were being built. The legal clinic they established became a model for other cities. It provided free legal help to victims of similar injustices, staffed by volunteer lawyers and law students. The clinic's walls displayed success stories, cases won, lives rebuilt, justice served. Each victory added momentum to the movement for change. 1 year after the verdict, they held a community celebration. The crowd was diverse: lawyers and activists, police officers and community members, all working together for reform. The defense attorney's speech was brief but powerful. This started with one traffic stop, he said, but it became about all of us standing together for justice. His wife still taught at the same school, but now she included lessons about civil rights and civic responsibility. His daughter was heading to law school, inspired by what she had witnessed. The family had emerged stronger, their commitment to justice deeper than ever. Late that evening, driving home from the celebration, he passed the spot where he had been pulled over that night. The street looked different now. Cameras monitored police activity, signs informed people of their rights, the community watched out for each other. One innocent man's nightmare had transformed into hope for thousands. Looking in his rearview mirror, he saw the city lights glowing. Somewhere out there, another innocent person might be facing injustice tonight, but now they wouldn't face it alone. The system was changing, slowly but surely, one case, one reform, one victory at a time. The fight wasn't over, but the path to justice was clearer than ever before.